When it comes to ICBMs, the options for payloads are endless: nuclear warheads, chemical weapons, and everything in between. But in a historic first, President Putin launched an ICBM to deliver something kind of unorthodox: a message. On November the 21st, 2024, a new Russian intermediate-range ballistic missile codenamed Oreshnik targeted a facility in Dnipro, Ukraine. This missile, capable of traveling at speeds of up to Mach 10, was described by Putin as a response to Ukraine's use of Western-supplied long-range missiles, such as the American ATACMS and British Storm Shadow, against Russian territories. He emphasized that any country providing such support could become a target, highlighting the missile's potential to strike deep into Europe and the United States. This was his way of telling the West, back off. As the Ukraine-Russia war passes its 1000th day, the war appears to be entering its most perilous and potentially final phase, according to both Russian and Western officials. Moscow's forces are advancing at a speed not seen since the early weeks of the conflict, while the West grapples with questions about how the war might conclude. In response to Russian advances, President Biden authorized the deployment of ATACMS missiles, allowing Ukraine to strike targets within Russia. It didn't take long before President Putin escalated further by signing a revised nuclear doctrine, lowering the threshold for a potential Russian nuclear strike. However, this is not the first time the Russian president has played the nuke card. Since before the full-scale invasion in February 2022, Russia has routinely issued warnings about the dangers of Western military aid to Ukraine. The Kremlin has denounced the delivery of F-16 fighter jets, Patriot air defense systems, and Western tanks, citing significant risks and consequences. So, what is different this time? First of all, it is important to understand that Putin's stance aligns with Russia's escalate to de-escalate doctrine, which justifies the first use of tactical nuclear weapons to force adversaries to back down. The recent revision of Russia's nuclear doctrine appears aimed at reinforcing the credibility of its threats, especially as the US prepares for a change in administration. Secondly, Russia's updated nuclear doctrine significantly broadens the conditions for using nuclear weapons. It now permits their use not only in response to existential threats, but also against any attack deemed a critical threat to its sovereignty or territorial integrity, an interpretation underscored by recent strikes on Russian arsenals in the Kursk region using US-made ballistic missiles. Furthermore, the doctrine introduces a notable shift. For the first time, Russia claims the right to use nuclear weapons against a conventional armed state if it is supported by a nuclear power. This provision clearly applies to Ukraine, which is backed by 3 of the original nuclear-armed nations: the United States, Britain, and France. In the context of the Ukraine conflict, experts suggest that if Russia were to consider nuclear deployment, it would likely involve tactical nuclear weapons. Designed for battlefield use, these weapons target specific military objectives such as troop concentrations, command centers, and key infrastructure. These weapons are delivered using short-range systems such as artillery shells, battlefield missiles, or aircraft. Their range is generally limited to regional targets. Tactical nukes are generally expected to cause less widespread damage and fallout due to their lower yield and localized application. So, no Sarmat ICBM yet. Russia's potential nuclear deployment in Ukraine could take several forms. A high-altitude explosion over the Black Sea aimed at demonstrating power without causing casualties. A decapitation strike using a nuclear bunker buster to target President Volodymyr Zelensky and top military officials. Or a tactical nuclear attack on a military target designed to minimize civilian casualties. However, there is one more option. Some experts argue that Russia's motivations for considering nuclear use in a potential victory scenario in Ukraine might resemble those behind the US decision in 1945. Putin's reference to the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombings in his September 2022 speech may have been more than rhetorical. With victory within reach but not yet secured, Russia might decide to launch a nuclear-armed missile at a secondary Ukrainian city, demanding Ukraine's immediate and unconditional surrender under the threat of targeting another major city next. Such an ultimatum could make further resistance from Kiev appear futile, even suicidal. This approach would allow Russia to end the war more swiftly, with fewer casualties and on terms highly favorable to itself. For Russia, the prospect of ruling over a radioactive wasteland might not be a deterrent, given its previous devastation of cities that were reduced to rubble by artillery and bombing before being occupied. A single tactical nuclear strike could achieve a similar level of destruction with far greater efficiency, albeit with the added burden of radioactivity. However, the precedent of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, rebuilt within a few years and now thriving cities, might diminish concerns about the long-term consequences of such a move for Russia. Moreover, if Ukraine's defeat appears inevitable, the US and NATO might hesitate to follow through on threats of severe military retaliation. Needless to say, a Russian nuclear strike could profoundly influence NATO's future calculations, enabling Moscow to shape the post-war European order to its advantage. While the majority of experts believe that Russian President Vladimir Putin is unlikely to use nuclear weapons in Ukraine, an increasing number consider it a possibility. That wraps up our latest update on the Ukraine-Russia war. What are your thoughts on President Putin's latest nuclear maneuver? Do you believe the 8-decade taboo on nuclear weapons use is about to be broken? Share your opinions in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel to stay updated on the latest developments from conflict zones and military technology around the world. Remember to hit the subscribe button and ring that bell to stay updated with our latest content. And while you're here, why not check out another one of our exciting videos? Thanks for watching and see you in the next one.